The Togoland Campaign was a French and British invasion of the German colony of Togoland in West Africa. During the West African Campaign of the First World War, German colonial forces withdrew from the capital Lomé and the coastal province and then fought delaying actions on the route north to Chra, where a new wireless station linked Berlin to Togoland, the Atlantic and South America. The main British and French force from the neighbouring colonies of Gold Coast and Dahomey advanced from the coast up the road and railway, as smaller forces converged on Chra from the north. The German defenders were able to delay the invaders for several days at the battles of Agboulouho and Chra, but surrendered the colony on 26 August. 1914. In 1916, Togoland was partitioned by the victors, and in July 1922, British Togoland and French Togoland were established as League of Nations mandates. Background: Togoland, 1914. The German Empire had established a protectorate over Togoland in 1884, which was slightly larger than Ireland and had a population of c. 1 million people in 1914. A mountain range with heights of over 3,000 feet ran southeast to northwest and restricted traffic between the coast and hinterland. South of the high ground, the ground rises from coastal marshes and lagoons to a plateau about 200 to 300 feet high, covered in forest and high grass and scrub, where farmers had cleared the forest for oil palm cultivation. The climate was tropical, with more rainfall in the interior and a dry season with little rain in August. Half of the border with Gold Coast ran along the Volta River and a tributary, but in the south, the border for 80 miles was beyond the east bank. The Germans had made the southern region one of the most developed colonies in Africa, having built 3-meter gauge railway lines and several roads from Lomé, the capital and main city. There was no port and ships had to lie off Lomé and transfer freight by surf boats. One line ran along the coast from Oneko to Lomé, one ran from Lomé to Atik Pama and one from Lomé to Palim. Roads had been built from Lomé to Atik Pama and Sukode, Palim to Ketakrachi and from Ketakrachi to Sansei-Munguan in 1914, were reported to be fit for motor vehicles. German military forces in Togoland were exiguous. There were no German army units. Only 693 Polizeitruppen under the command of Captain Georg Faller and about 300 colonists with military training. The colony was adjacent to Allied territory, with French Dahomey on its northern and eastern borders and the British Gold Coast to the west. Lomé and the wireless station at Chra, about 100 kilometers inland, which was connected to the coast by road and rail, were the only places of military significance. Chra was near the town of Atik Pama and had been completed in June 1914. The transmitter was a relay station for communication between Germany, the overseas colonies, the Imperial German Navy and South America. The Admiralty wished to prevent the station from being used to coordinate attacks on shipping in the Atlantic. At the outbreak of war, the governor of Togoland, Duke Adolf Friedrich of Mecklenburg, was in Germany and his deputy, Major Hans-Georg von Doring, was the acting governor. Gold Coast, 1914. Sir Hugh Clifford, the governor of the Gold Coast, Lieutenant General Charles Macpherson Dobell, commander of the West African Frontier Force, and Lieutenant Colonel R.A. de B. Rose, commander of the Gold Coast Regiment, were absent in July 1914. W.C. F. Robertson was the acting governor and Captain Frederick Carkeach Bryant was acting commandant of the Gold Coast Regiment. The Gold Coast Regiment had 1 pioneer, 7 infantry companies with a machine gun each and a battery of 4 QF 2.95-inch mountain guns, with 1,595 men including 124 carriers and c. 330 reservists. There were 4 volunteer corps, with c. 900 men and 1,200 police and customs men. The defense scheme for the Gold Coast provided for war against the French in neighboring Ivory Coast and the Germans in Togoland, in the event of war with Germany. The colony was to be defended along Lake Volta and the northeastern frontier against the possibility of a raid, which was the most that the Germans in Togoland were thought capable. The plan also provided for an offensive across the lake into the north of Togoland, before making a thrust south to the more populated portion of the colony. On the 29th of July, a colonial office telegram arrived at Chra, ordering the adoption of the precautionary stage of the defense scheme, and Robertson forwarded the information to Bryant the next day. Bryant dispensed with the scheme, which had not been revised after the wireless station at Camina was built, and by the 31st of July, had mobilized the Gold Coast Regiment along the southern, rather than a northern border with Togoland. In London on the 3rd of August, Dobell proposed in advance, if war was declared, along the coast road from Ada to Quito and thence to Lomé-Acute, which was fewer than 2 miles from the border. Bryant had reached the same conclusion as Dobell and had already organized small expeditionary columns at Karachi and Ada and assembled the main force at Kumasi, ready to move in either direction. Prelude. Anglo-French offensive preparations. On 5 August 1914, a day after Britain declared war on Germany, the Allies cut the German sea cables between Monrovia and Tenerife, leaving the radio station at Camina the only connection between the colony and Germany. The same day, the acting governor of Togoland, Major von Doring, sent a telegram to Robertson proposing neutrality, in accordance with Articles X and Xi of the Congo Act, which stated that colonies in the Congo Basin were to remain neutral in the event of a conflict in Europe. Von Doring also appealed for neutrality because of the economic interdependence of the West African colonies and their common interest in dominating local populations. On 6 August, the cabinet in London refused the offer of neutrality, and Bryant, on his own initiative, after hearing that the French in Dahomey wished to cooperate, sent Captain Barker and the district commissioner of Quito to von Doring, with a demand the surrender of the colony, and gave 24 hours to reply. Next morning, the British intercepted a wireless message from von Doring that he was withdrawing from the coast to Camina and that Lomé-Acute would be surrendered if attacked. A similar proposal for neutrality from von Doring had been received by the governor of Dahomey, who took it as a declaration of war and ordered an invasion, according to a plan to seize Lomé-Acute and the coast, which had been drafted in ignorance of the wireless station at Camina, only 60 kilometers from the Dahomey border. Invasion. Capture of Lomé-Acute. Late on 6 August, French police occupied customs posts near Athema, and next day Major Mawoy, the commander of French military forces in Dahomey, ordered the capture of Agbanake and Anaho. Agbanake was occupied late on 7 August. The Mono River was crossed and a column under Captain Marchand took Anaho early on 8 August. Both moves were unopposed and local civilians helped to see off the Germans by burning down the government house at Seba. The c. 460 colonists and Askaris retreated inland, impressing civilians and calling up reservists as they moved north. Repairs began on the Anaho-Lomé-Acute railway, and the French advanced to Porto Seguro and Togo before stopping the advance. Once it was clear that Lomé-Acute had been surrendered to British forces, the British invasion began late on 7 August. The British emissaries returned to Lomé-Acute by lorry, to find that the Germans had left for Camina and given a hair clause at the discretion to surrender the colony up to Chra, 120 kilometers inland, to prevent a naval bombardment of Lomé-Acute. On 8 August, The emissaries took command of 14 British soldiers and police from Aflao. A telegraph operator arrived by bicycle and repaired the line to Chra and Chra. The British flag was raised, and on the 9th of August, parties of troops arrived, having marched 50 miles in exhausting heat over the border. Bryant had arranged to move the main force by sea and embarked on the Ilela on the 10th of August. 3 other companies had been ordered to Karachi, to begin a land advance to Kamina. The Ilela arrived off Lomi Acute on the 12th of August, and the force disembarked through the surf. Arrangements were made with the French for a converging advance towards Atakpama by the British and the French from Anaho. A French column under Mawoy from Chetty in the north, and the British column at Karachi under Captain Elgi. Small British forces on the northern border were put under the command of Mawoy in order to move south, as a c. 560 French cavalry were ordered across the northern border from Senegal and Niger, towards Saint-Mangou from 13 to 15 August. The British force at Lomi Acute comprised 558 soldiers, 2,084 carriers, police and volunteers, who were preparing to advance inland. When Bryant received news of a German foray to Togoland advance to Kamina, the Battle of Bafilo was a skirmish between French and German troops in northeast Togoland on the 13th of August. French forces had crossed the border between French Dahomey and Togoland on 8 to 9 August and were engaged by German troops in the districts of Saint-Mangou and Scode-Balfilo. The French company retreated, after facing greater resistance than expected. After the capture of Lomi Acute on the coast, Bryant was promoted to lieutenant colonel, made commander of all Allied forces in the operation, and landed at Lomi Acute on the 12th of August, with the main British force of 558 soldiers, 2,084 carriers, police and volunteers. As preparations began to advance northwards to Kamina, Bryant heard that a German party had travelled south by train the day before. The party had destroyed a small wireless transmitter and railway bridge at Togoland, about 10 miles to the north. Bryant detached half an infantry company on the 12th of August and sent another 1.5 companies forward the next day, to prevent further attacks. By the evening, I Company had reached Sievi. Scouts reported that the country south of Agbaluvo was clear of German troops and the main force had reached Togoland. At 10 p.m., I Company began to advance up the road to Agbaluvo. The relatively harsh terrain of bushland and swamp impeded the Allied push to Kamina, by keeping the invaders on the railway and the road, which had fallen into disrepair and was found to be impassable by wheeled vehicles. Communication between the parties was difficult, because of the intervening high grass and thick scrub. The main force moved on from Togoland at 6 a.m. In the afternoon, the British advance guard met German troops near the Lily River, who blew the bridge in Dugan on a ridge on the far side. The demolitions and the delaying action held up the advance until 4:30 p.m., and the force spent the night at Ekuni rather than joining I Company as intended. Von Doring had sent 2 raiding parties with 200 men south in trains, to delay the advancing Allied force. I Company had heard the train run south at 4 a.m., while halted on the road near Ekuni, a village about 6 miles south of Agbaluvo. A section was sent to cut off the train, and the rest of I Company pressed on to Agbaluvo. A local civilian guided the section to the railway, where Lieutenant Collins and his men piled stones and a heavy iron plate on the tracks, about 200 yards north of the bridge at Ekuni, and then set an ambush. One of the trains of 20 cars was derailed by the obstacles placed on the tracks, and the other train was halted by the rest of I Company at the Battle of Agbaluvo. In the fight between German troops in the railway carriages and the British, Fowler was killed. The Germans were defeated and lost a quarter of the force. Battle of Chra, the 22nd of August. Despite the skirmish in the northwest at Bafilo and the action at Agbaluvo, Allied forces advancing towards the German base at Kamina had not encountered substantial resistance. The last natural barrier south of Camina was the Chra River, where von Doering chose to make a stand. The railway bridge over the river was destroyed and the approaches to the river and village were mined. On the 21st of August, British scouts found 460 to 560 German police troops entrenched on the north bank of the river. The West African Rifles, supported by French forces from the east, assembled on the south bank, and during the 22nd of August, Bryant launched a series of assaults on the German entrenchments, which were repulsed and in which the British suffered 17% casualties. Lieutenant George Masterman Thompson became the first British officer to be killed in action in the First World War. Although the Germans had repelled the Allied force from a fortified position, which was easy to supply, French troops were advancing from the north and east towards Camina unchecked, and a British column was advancing on the station from Cataraqui in the west. On the morning of the 23rd of August, the British found that the German trenches had been abandoned. German forces from the Chra had withdrawn to the wireless station, and during the night of 24–25 August, explosions were heard from the direction of Camina. French and British forces arrived at Camina on the 26th of August. To find that the 9 radio towers had been demolished and the electrical equipment destroyed. Von Doering and 200 remaining troops surrendered the colony to Bryant. The rest of the German force had deserted. The Allied troops recovered 3 Maxim machine guns, 1,000 rifles and c. 320,000 rounds of ammunition. Aftermath. Analysis. Before the wireless station at Camina was destroyed, 229 messages were passed between Germany, the Navy and colonies following the outbreak of war. The first military operations of British soldiers during the First World War occurred in Togoland and ended soon after British operations began in continental Europe. In December 1916, the colony was split into British and French occupation zones, which cut through administrative divisions and civilian boundaries. Both powers sought a new partition, and in 1919, Article 22 of the Treaty of Versailles partitioned former German colonies between the Allies. In July 1922, British Togoland and French Togoland were created from former German Togoland, as League of Nations mandates. The French acquisition consisted of 60% of the colony, including the coast. The British received the smaller, less populated and less developed portion of Togoland, to the west. The part administered by the British, united with Ghana upon its independence in 1957, French Togoland gained independence in 1960, becoming the modern Togolese Republic. The surrender of Togoland marked the beginning of the end for the German colonial empire, which lost its African and Pacific possessions. Casualties. British casualties in the campaign were 83, French casualties were 54 and German casualties were 41. An unknown number of troops and carriers deserted on both sides.